Hello and welcome to the Gameplay Cast's review of the PC turn-based strategy RPG game Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate Demon Hunters. This is a reboot of a very old game from 1998, and yes, I'm going to be playing the soundtrack from the original game throughout this review. Enjoy. Back in 1998, I was given my first turn-based strategy game, Chaos Gate. At the time, it was amazing. The crazy over-the-top voice acting was only exceeded by the soundtrack, which was hypnotically brilliant. I absolutely love this game, and I still have the original game disc somewhere in my collection. Despite the game's quality, no sequel was ever published, and so it was lost to the warp. Or so I thought. Over a decade later, the Chaos Gate name has reappeared. I really hoped for a game that would be a worthy successor to the title. Happily, I can confirm that Demon Hunters delivers, and is well worth the £24 or $32 price tag. This time, instead of commanding a chapter of Ultramarines, the player commands the Grey Knight strike cruiser, the Baleful Edict. The cruiser is depleted after a long campaign against the forces of the Blood God Khorne, and on its way back to Titan for respite. Unfortunately, the plague god Nurgle has other plans, and the strike force is commandeered by a tenacious Inquisitor and set to work investigating a strange new affliction known as the Bloom. The game's main characters have good voice acting, as do the various knights and enemies you encounter throughout the course of the game. Generally, the game is purposely light on the lore up front so as not to put off new players, while providing codex entries and more reading material for those who want a deep dive into the Grey Knights and Warhammer lore. As a side note, the Grey Knights are awesome and well worth reading up on if you are not familiar. The story arc is pretty predictable, and I didn't find the Bloom to be an overly appealing hook. However, throughout there are enough plot developments and narrative twists to keep it interesting. Unlike its predecessor, the game focuses on a small strike force of up to 4 Grey Knights, much like the recent XCOM games, so no deploying multiple squads and no vehicles either. Boo! They have, however, added dynamic cutscenes and sharper gameplay features, such as the melee critical hits, where you can choose to inflict certain penalties and in some cases, straight up execute enemies, with each type of melee weapon performing a different execution. Nice. There are also destructible environments and plenty of things like statues and ammunition crates that you can push and explode onto unfortunate foes. The game tutorial is excellent, doing a good job of introducing the combat mechanics of the game. For anyone familiar with the XCOM games, this is obviously similar. For those of you who are not, turn-based strategy games work much like the combat in board games like Dungeons & Dragons. Combat is split into turns, yours and the computer's. On your turn, each of your knights has 3 action points which are used to move, attack, reload, use your abilities, etc. When you run out of action points or you end your turn, the computer takes their turn, and this goes on until the enemy is defeated or your knights are killed. As a strategy game, there are quite a few things to consider and abilities to get used to. For example, it took me a while to understand and utilise the stun mechanic. Enemies have a stun meter alongside their hit points. Most of the time, each hit decreases their stun meter, 0 meaning they are stunned. Why is this useful, you say? Because a hit on a stunned enemy is an instant crit, especially useful if you want to chain together executions, which grants extra action points for your knights. I didn't find the UI difficult to understand, and I think it does a good enough job of balancing information and function. Completing each combat mission grants XP to the knights who took part and offers requisition points, bloom seeds and other goodies. When not in combat, the game moves to a top level interface. Here we get to set the Edict's course, accept missions, manage your knight in the barracks, set servitors to work, these are kind of like Warhammer droids, and to set our resident Inquisitor research tasks. The story is in fact driven by the research mechanic, whereby when the correct topic is successfully researched, the story and game map progresses to the next stage. I personally didn't mind this mechanic too much, although once you're aware of the triggers, it does allow players to sort of farm certain aspects of the game to maximise upgrades and reward, which makes the end game a lot easier, mainly on the easier difficulties. This is a lot harder to do on legendary. While waiting for the research topics to count down, random bloom events occur, usually in sets of 3. This generally means you can only resolve 2 at best, guaranteeing that the bloom rating in the system overall will almost certainly keep increasing. The higher the bloom rating of the mission, the harder the mission. What of the RPG leveling and customization of your knights, you say? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is one area where the game shines. Each knight has its own class, and each class has a leveling tree. There are 4 base classes and 4 advanced classes, and you level or promote each knight from levels 1 to 9. There's plenty of armor and equipment, which is split into ranks. The higher ranked gear not only performs better, but makes you look more and more badass. Something else which I think is a great touch are the random events and check-ins with the Grand Master. These add much needed variety between missions, and if resolved wisely, can offer bonuses and upgrades. Or conversely, restrictions and penalties. These go some way towards remedying the repetitive nature of many of the game's missions, adding a bit more variety and decision making to the game. Graphically, I think for this type of game, the graphics are good. It's not going to win any awards for ultra realism, but the visuals are very much in tune with the setting and add to the immersion. The maps look good, as do the destructible environments and effects. However, I can definitely see why the cartoonish nature of the game's graphics might not be to everyone's taste. I ran the game on all the max settings, and the frame rate was rock solid for 99% of the game, only starting to lag a bit when there were multiple area of effect particle effects in place simultaneously on the last mission of the game, which I've got to say was glitchy at times. Unfortunately, quite a lot of the dynamic cutscenes get blocked by bits of scenery as you play, which is also a shame, unless you enjoy looking at bits of wall or metal. In that case, it's brilliant. That said, I love the visuals of the Edict in orbit around the planets. The fact that you can see the battle damage on the screens and in the cutscenes is awesome. The attention to detail on the knight's armor and weaponry is also great. Seeing the blade's name, Endbringer, embossed on the blade of your knight's weapon is sick. I absolutely love it. You can see the individual purity seals on the weapon and armor after you upgrade them too. It's cool. So, what didn't I like about the game? Well, though I've recommended the game, it is far from perfect. Firstly, we have the visual errors I mentioned above, primarily relating to the dynamic cutscenes. A couple of times, particularly during the final story mission, the game crashed at the same point multiple times, and I was only able to progress by reloading and killing the enemy that caused the repetitive crash. This didn't ruin my experience of the game, but it did interrupt my flow and cause some minor frustration. Speaking of combat, on standard difficulty, the enemy AI isn't the brightest spark, and the computer has a tendency to overuse the Overwatch ability as opposed to actually trying to kill you. I mean, I wanted to win the campaign, but even when I made blatant tactical mistakes, the computer rarely capitalised. That said, I'm not going to say there was no challenge. The harder difficulties ramp up significantly. Legendary on Grandmaster mode is not for the faint-hearted, and I have failed multiple campaigns on that. It is difficult. However, my biggest issue is the repetitive nature of the randomly generated missions. There are essentially only 3 mission types: destroy the seed carriers, stop the bloom spreader, and destroy the bloom spawn. You're going to do a fair few of these, especially if you're trying to unlock all of the different research and ship upgrade options. They can really start to grate. In comparison to the story missions, they really do become quite boring, and I think the game sorely needed an auto-resolve button, sort of like the one you get in the Total War games. This extends to the enemies as well. We fought Bloodletters in the tutorial, that's the red demons, and then disappointingly, they didn't feature in the game after that. Instead, we get the same 4 to 5 Nurgle variants in every mission. I know it's a campaign against Nurgle, but it would have been nice to come across some third parties. Equally, because the research mechanic is essentially driving the story, you're forced to do a certain number of these random missions. You can ignore them to a point, but since you need seeds for the research, and the only way to get seeds is from the missions, you really have no choice but to fight through the pain. In summary, the detail in this game is impressive, and I thoroughly enjoyed this long overdue continuation of the Chaos Gate franchise. The setting and story were interesting and immersive enough to keep me interested, despite the repetitive nature of the randomly generated missions. The various random events and their effects also had a much needed sprinkling of variety. This, combined with the set piece story missions and boss battles, was more than enough to get me through. I still think an auto-resolve button for the random missions would have eased my suffering considerably by the end of the game, but we all have our wishes. Despite their random nature, the random missions do ramp up the sense of urgency, which is something that in my opinion many games struggle to achieve, resorting to simple difficulty gates or trusting the player to progress the story in the way it was intended. By the end of this campaign, I soon found myself being forced to focus on just getting to the end before too many Chaos Gates opened, rather than ambling around the system, fighting every battle and trying to upgrade every facet of my ship, as I was doing at the start. And this was achieved in a gradual process that rewarded wise choices and good tactics. Equally, as much as it hurt my RPG OCD not being able to fight every battle, the consequence of this was I had to really stop and think about which engagements were the priority and was it worth the resources / rewards. So the urgency generated felt genuine and actually natural and built up the momentum of the campaign. The few gameplay glitches and visual errors I experienced weren't enough to diminish what is a polished and most importantly addictively fun experience. I award Chaos Gate a solid 7 out of 10. Warhammer and strategy fans alike should be able to enjoy this game, and for the price, it offers plenty of bang for your buck. I hope the studio can build this solid foundation into an even better sequel. This score could easily have been higher if the randomly generated missions had a bit more variety. Equally, I think there is room for larger scale combat, like deploying multiple squads, adding vehicles. I'd personally love to see some tanks or dreadnoughts, more enemy factions, etc. However, I would like to say well done on a good game and successfully reviving a dead IP. Now build on it, we want more games for the game gods. That was a really poor Khorne Berserker impression for anyone who's interested. I've been Tim from Gameplay Casts, you've been awesome, and all that's left for me to say is peace out guys and thanks for watching.